Just a couple terms to review. FAFSA, as I'm sure we're all aware by now, is the federal student aid form that your student will have filled out and submitted, and that's basically the big form that a student needs to submit in order to be considered for financial aid at a college. The expected family contribution, or you'll hear us say EFC, as it's typically called, is the amount that FAFSA calculates that your family can pay for school. It's an estimate. It's not by any means a final number, but it's just like they've taken a look at your information and they're saying like, okay, we think that this is generally what your family can be expected to pay. You'll find that number on your student aid report. So you can ask your student to log into their platform, the FAFSA platform, and check their student aid report, and there will be a number right there that'll tell them. If there's a little asterisk next to that number, it means that your student has been selected for verification, which just means FAFSA wants a couple more documents, and those you'll have to submit to the schools that your student has applied to. That if that happens, it's not anything that you or your student did wrong. It's random. It happens to maybe like 1 in 4 students, and it's just kind of like going through TSA at the airport or whatever. Not about you, just about them wanting additional documents. So if that happens, your student will want to keep an eye on their email and on their student portal, because the school may reach out to them to ask for additional documentation. I also recommend that a student, if they know they've been selected for verification, reach out to the schools, go ahead and be proactive and get on top of it, just so that the paperwork is being turned in on time. Your student's also going to want to keep an eye on their portals and their emails for their award letter. I just bring that up here because, you know, it sounds like it's a letter, but at this point it's mostly an email, or maybe it'll come up in your student portal, and that will be, you know, the offer with the financial aid, whether that's loans, scholarships, grants, but that's the big thing that we're going to be talking about here today. Subsidized versus unsubsidized loans is a topic that Lina is going to cover a little bit later, but that's one that sometimes people have trouble with and have a lot of questions about. So really quickly, a subsidized loan is subsidized by the government, which means that they are paying the interest while your student is in college and up to 6 months after. So your student doesn't actually have to pay any interest on that loan or start paying it back until 6 months down the road after they graduate, versus an unsubsidized loan, which the student is responsible for the interest and it starts gathering the moment they take out the loan. So we always tell people, if you have to take out a loan, start with the subsidized. Those are the good ones. And finally, work study is something that may show up on your student's financial aid offer, and that is a job that your student can have on campus, and they will work for the school, whether it's like mine was with the library. Sometimes people are in the mailroom, sometimes people are assistants for various professors, or, you know, things like that. And that's a job that your student can have to make money while they're on campus. But what I like to point out about a work study job is that your student won't start making any money from that until they get to school, apply for the job, get the job, and start working some hours. So that money is good to keep in mind as far as like paying for books or paying for tuition down the road. But unlike a scholarship or a grant or a loan, they won't be getting that upfront before they start school. So those are the key terms. I'm going to take a sip of water, and if anyone has a question about any of that, you're welcome to toss it out. Otherwise, we'll move on to the next thing. So here we have, I'm sorry, there's a loud motorcycle on my street, and if you can hear it, I apologize. Here we have a sample award letter, and we're going to break this down into a couple categories and try to make it a little simpler. So first, on your award letter, they're going to talk about the cost of attendance. That can be direct costs like tuition and fees, or indirect costs like books and supplies, and I'll get into that on the next slide. Then we're going to talk about your aid. So that's, you know, the grants, the scholarships, the work study, the loans, anything that the school offers to you to help you pay tuition back. And then finally, we'll look at your bill and your balance. Basically, the very simple math equation is like cost of attendance minus the aid that you've been awarded is your bill. Must a student, we've got a question in the chat, must a student accept the work study in order to accept the Pell Grant offered? My understanding of that is no. The Pell Grant is separate from the work study, and your student does not have to accept it if they do not want to. Lina's nodding, so.
Yes, that is. And something else to keep in mind is even if your student accepts the work study, they have to get an on-campus job in order for the work study funds to be released. It's basically just an opportunity for them to get on-campus employment, and on-campus employment is nice because they're a lot more flexible with hours, with making sure that they get time off during winter break and summer break. You know, some allowances that a typical job might not have. So your student can accept the work study, get on campus, feel really overwhelmed by their classes, and then decide that they end up not wanting to use their work study. In some cases, you can ask for the work study funds to be converted into loans. So it'll depend student by student what they decide they want to do, but no, they don't have to accept the work study in order to qualify for the Pell.
Thank you, Lina, for taking that one. We've got another question about work study. Does the money get added to your taxes as income? So the money is income for your student, so it wouldn't get added to your taxes as a parent. It would be, it would count towards taxes for your student, but also given the standard deduction, like your student most likely won't actually owe taxes on it. Like when I do think that I had taxes taken out of my work study in school, and then I ended up getting like a small refund because, you know, the most, I can't remember the exact number. It's either like 2,500 or 3,000, but there's always a cap on the amount of money that a work study student can make. And I guess this is an important distinction to make. So when you see that number on your letter and it says like $2,000 work study allowance, that doesn't mean your student will get $2,000. It means your student is allowed to make up to $2,000. So if they only work, you know, if they work a smaller amount of shifts, maybe they'll make 1,000 instead of 2,000, but either way, whatever they make, it's not going to be enough to be taxable, and it wouldn't count towards the parents' taxes because it's going straight to the student. Yeah, work study. So back to the cost of attendance. We separate the cost of attendance into two categories. You have your direct costs, which are your tuition, your fees, your room and your board if your student lives on campus. Basically, any cost that goes directly to the school is a direct cost. An indirect cost is something like, you know, a student's textbooks or traveling home over the holidays or someone's personal expenses like shampoo and, you know, toothpaste or whatever. And those are things that are more on a person-to-person basis. So with the direct costs, with tuition, with fees, and with room and board, if your student is living in a dorm, that number isn't going to change. That's a fixed number. But your indirect costs are a little more flexible because, like, let's say, you know, instead of buying textbooks, your student decides to rent textbooks, which I always recommend. That means that they're probably not going to spend, you know, on this letter, it has $1,500 for books and supplies. They'll probably save a lot of money with that. If your student's really great at budgeting and they spend $1,000 instead of $2,000 on their personal expenses, then that's another way to bring that number down. So the indirect costs, there's a little more flexibility there, and that's kind of up to personal budgeting, but the direct costs are not going to change, and those are decided by the school. Yeah, let's do next slide. Okay, sweet. So now we're going to talk about the aid that's been awarded to students. So as I said before, financial aid breaks down into three categories. You have your free money, which is grants, scholarships, that kind of thing you don't have to pay back. The Pell Grant, the Pell Grant is a federal grant that a lot of people know about and get. Like, that's a grant from the government. A lot of schools have grants that they offer. A lot of schools have scholarships, either like merit-based or other things. So that's money that you're going to get and not going to have to pay back, goes against the cost of tuition. Awesome. Work study, as we talked about, is a job that your student can get on campus and they can work up to a certain amount. So that amount is a little more flexible. And then your loans are another way that a college will give you opportunities to try to close that gap and help pay for school. But something that should be noted here is that loans do need to be paid back. So sometimes a school will, like on this aid letter, they've put grants and scholarships, work study, and loans all in the same category. And that can be a little confusing because it looks like they've given the student $29,100, but that student actually has to pay back like $9,500 of that. If you see, they've got Perkins loan, the subsidized loan, and the unsubsidized loan. So out of that $29,000, $9,000 is actually money that the student's going to be paying back. And then if you look up at the work study, there's $2,000 for that, but that's money that the student has to earn over time. So they're not going to have that upfront to pay tuition when you get your first bill in July. So that's something to keep in mind as you're looking at your aid that's been awarded. And all of the advisors have really great spreadsheets that help you like break down and compare the aid. So I 100% recommend encouraging your student to meet with their advisor to talk about their aid award letters, and even tagging along so that you can see how we break it down. And all the aid letters are formatted differently too. So this will just help you really compare schools side by side in a very clear way. I think that's all I want to talk about on this slide. Does anyone have any questions before I move to the last one? Not the last slide, just the last one about categories. Cool. Okay, I'll keep going. So the remaining balance is your bill. So that's what you owe when you have, cost of attendance minus the aid we just talked about, remaining balance. And your student, your student will get the first bill probably in July. So there is tuition that is generally owed before a student even starts stepping onto campus, and that's good to plan for. We have a couple financial aid comparison tools that we're going to share with you, and we are also going to send you an email after this whole presentation, so you don't have to remember this link. We will send it to you. But one website that we wanted to highlight is Big Future. They are created by College Board, and they help you look at the different schools that your student has applied to and compare the aid that they've been offered. And then we have one more, which is our own personal spreadsheet that we've made. And that's something that, like I was saying, if your student has a meeting with their advisor will most likely use this tool or something very, very similar to input all of the information from all the different schools and compare side by side. Yeah, so those are some tools we'll share with you after the meeting. And I think that now it's time for me to pass it on to Lina.
Thanks for all that info, Sophie. So Sophie did a really good job of laying out the different parts of a financial aid award. I'm going to kind of go into what happens after you receive some of those award letters. So let's get started on that. So the first thing that we want you guys to be aware of is that you can negotiate award letters to an extent. It's always important to ask, especially if your student has their heart really set on a particular school. Don't be afraid to ask if there are more funds available. Sometimes those funds can come in different ways. Maybe your student will be invited to apply for an extra scholarship. Maybe they will be offered another loan. Maybe their grant aid will go up a little bit. But the only way to not get more money is to not ask at all. Typically, the most traditional way that students go about asking for more money is if they've been accepted to a similar school and they received better financial aid package at that school. They can take that financial aid package, bring it to their top choice school and say, listen, this is my dream school. These are all the things that I hope to accomplish here. These are all the reasons that I want to go to the school. But I received a better financial aid package at another institution. Is there any way that you can match it? So making sure that you're coming into this negotiation with some tools in your back pocket is important. And also making sure that you as a parent let the student write the letter. That's really important, because you really want to make sure that the student is putting across why they really want to attend that school and why it's important for their financial aid to go up a little bit. So also being really clear with the amount of money that you're asking for and being realistic and being prepared for any outcome. So making sure that you are still considering the other schools that might have given you a better financial aid package, making sure that you're having conversations with your student about what is realistic that your family can afford. Also checking with your student if they're planning on getting any sort of summer job, if they're planning on contributing anything to their college education, putting all cards on the table and making that clear, so that you guys make the best decision possible for yourselves as a family. Something that we wanted to make note of that has been an issue for some of our families this year is that since you used your 2020 income taxes to fill out the FAFSA, it's been an issue with some parents that if they reported unemployment on their income taxes, their expected family contribution was higher than expected. So just make sure that if this is your case, that you guys are really taking a close look at your financial aid packages that receive. As I mentioned with the negotiation tool, something that can be a good way to negotiate is if your family circumstances have changed because you used 2020 income taxes and now we're in 2022. If anything changed, you can notify the schools of the income taxes that we provided no longer reflect our family's financial situation, and they will reevaluate that. They will ask for extra documentation, so be prepared to provide that. So that's just something to keep in mind. So loans, I'm going to spend probably more time on this slide than I've spent on the other ones, just because I think loans are scary. There's a lot of questions around them. There is lots to unpack here. The first thing I will say with loans is that they seem scarier than they actually are, but it is good to approach them with some fear, because you want to make sure that if your student takes on debt, it's a reasonable amount of debt, and it's debt that they will be able to pay off with whatever job they get after graduating. So with loans, it's important to know that there's different types of loans out there. When you guys receive your financial aid awards, there are things that are just listed and there's no explanation next to what each thing is. So that's why it's important to have your students meet with us so that really we can go over what everything means, because when I sit down with a student personally, I like to say, let's highlight all the things that are free money, and then let's look at the other things that you're being offered. Sometimes the way that schools lay out their financial aid awards, they like to really highlight that this is the total aid that we have offered you. But when you start to break down what is actually being offered, maybe half of that aid is free money, and then the other half is loans. And then it's important to look at the different types of loans. Like Sophie started talking about, there are unsubsidized and subsidized loans. So unsubsidized loans start gathering interest while your student is still in school. And subsidized loans, they don't get interest until 6 months after graduation. There are also institutional loans. So there are the loans that are borrowed from the government, but some schools also offer loans through them, and those interest rates will vary. So it's important before accepting the financial aid package that you really click on each type of loans and see the interest that is being offered. and making sure that you guys make the best decisions for yourselves. It's also important to note that if a loan is offered to you guys, you don't have to accept the full amount of the loan. You can see as a family, maybe we do need a little bit of a loan to supplement this because we think that your education is a worthy investment. So we'll borrow some money. It's also important to note that loans are usually offered to the student first, and those interest rates will be lower. There's also another thing called Parent Plus loan that you might be offered, and you might want to say, you know, as a student, I don't want my young person to accumulate debt yet. I will take out the loan on their behalf, but the parent loans are usually higher with interest rates than the student loans. So it's actually smarter to let your student borrow the money first. And also it starts building up their credit score. It teaches them about financial responsibility. It also might encourage them to pick a major and a career that will have a return on their investment where they are able to pay off that loan. Also be mindful that the loan, while you're taking it out year by year, college is a 4-year investment. So making sure that any amount that the student borrows, multiply that by 4, or sometimes multiply that by 5 in case your student takes a little bit longer to graduate, and have a conversation of like, what sort of jobs are you hoping to get after college? Let's look up the entry level income for this type of job and for this type of job, and then see what is reasonable for you to pay off. Also asking the student, what city are you hoping to live in after you graduate? If your student takes out a bunch of debt and then really has their heart set on, I really want to live in New York City after I graduate, a New York City rent is going to take up a big part of their paycheck. So there's just other expenses that you want your student to keep in mind when making these sort of decisions, because they might not have had to make financial decisions for themselves before. And with having you guys here, clearly you're invested in your students' educational journey. So make sure that you are having these frank conversations about what is realistic. Again, only take out what you need. You don't have to accept the full amount of loan. You can take a little bit. Also, usually the way that tuition and fees are paid, it's semester by semester or quarter by quarter if the schools are on a quarter system. So say that the first semester you guys decide, you know what, we're gonna try to make it work, let's not borrow any money. The second semester, something happens, you know, you're kind of in a pinch to make tuition, you can ask for that loan to be put back into the financial aid package. So know that loans, if you were offered them, you can also decide to take them out later. And like I mentioned, work study sometimes can be converted into a loan if your student really can't fit work into their schedule. We know that that first year, there's a lot of transitions. Students have to figure out time management. There's a lot happening, and then work might not be one of the things that they're able to do. So turning the work study into a loan might be an option. Again, consider future earning potential, return on investment, you know, how much debt are you taking on versus how much you think you can pay after graduation. All right, so with return on investment, some ways to sort of figure that out. What's the net price? So again, thinking about the debt, not only during the first year, but during all 4 years of college, what is that sort of gonna accumulate to? And then if it's a unsubsidized loan, how much interest will it accumulate while I'm in school, and what's gonna be the actual price point that I will end up borrowing? And I see a question in the chat, so let me look. Okay, if the college offers my student $2,500 in subsidized loans and $2,000 in unsubsidized, so usually the the schools will cap out what they let you borrow from each kind. So it would be nice if you could ask them to convert it all to subsidized loan, but usually that's like the amount that they're willing to give you, especially because the subsidized and unsubsidized are through the federal government. So that's what you qualify for based on the FAFSA. So it can't be converted to a subsidized loan, but what you can do is accept the full amount of the subsidized loan, and then maybe you don't accept the full 2,000 of the unsubsidized. Maybe you say, okay, I'm going to accept the 2,500 in the subsidized, and I will accept 1,000 of the unsubsidized, if that makes sense. And then just to close this out, there are different tools online that can help you plug in different numbers and sort of have an estimate of, if you get this job and if you make this this amount of monthly payments, this is how long it would take to pay off that loan. So I think that really helps visualize, is the amount that we're borrowing worth it? Will we be able to pay it off in a reasonable time? Does that make sense for us as a family? And then also thinking about if your student has aspirations for med school, law school, business school, usually there is less need-based financial aid once students go to grad school. So sometimes loans is really one of the only ways that students can supplement their financial aid for graduate school. So thinking about, this might not be the only student debt that you're taking on. So considering maybe doing a more affordable school, and then knowing that like later on they're going to go back for more grad school, and then that's where a lot of the big chunk of debt might come from. So loans are scary, but scholarships are here to help. So something to keep in mind is that it's not too late to apply for scholarships. Different scholarships show up throughout the year. So monthly we share different scholarships with our students, and it's important to keep applying for those. It's also important to keep in mind that $100 scholarship is nothing to scoff at. I think sometimes students see that there are some scholarships out there that are like $3,000 or $5,000, and they only spend their time applying to those, but sometimes those will be more competitive, where a smaller scholarship might help pay for textbooks or might help pay for a plane ticket home and things like that. So it's important to know that those little scholarships really can add up and help cover expenses that your student will have that maybe they haven't had before. Also, sometimes like scholarships that are supplemental, they're pretty flexible with what you can spend them on. So expenses like they can cover room and board, a meal plan, things like that. So food, travel expenses, stuff like that, they can also be supplemented by scholarships. And also like have your student treat this as a job. You know, if they worked at a local store and they could get $10 an hour, like it would take them some hours to make up what they would if they get a $200 scholarship. So have them think in those terms of, if you spent an hour on this essay for the scholarship, is 1 hour of your time worth $200 to you? So sometimes like reframing what it means to apply for scholarships is important. And also keeping in mind that like throughout the summer, like even after they've accepted a financial aid package, they've enrolled at a school, they can still keep applying for these scholarships. I think sometimes students put a lot of energy into applying for scholarships their senior year of high school, they get into college, things get busy and they forget that scholarships exist, but they can keep applying for scholarships while they're in college. A little asterisk, a little note that I will make with these supplemental scholarships is that the biggest financial aid should come from the schools themselves. You don't want to rely on making the education affordable from smaller scholarships, because again, this is a 4-year investment and you want to make sure that not only can you afford the first year of college, but can you afford year 2, year 3, year 4? So making sure that if your student gets cool scholarships this year, but they're not renewable for another year, what is going to happen next year if they're not awarded this local scholarship again? So that's something to keep in mind. Sometimes when scholarships are awarded, students can say, I want the full amount now, or I want you to give me a chunk of it per year. So say your student gets, just to make the math easy, gets a $4,000 scholarship. They can say, instead of giving me the $4,000 now, I want you to give me $1,000 each year. So it'll depend from scholarship to scholarship, but that might be an option. So again, sometimes when you get a financial aid letter, the total amount might not be necessarily what you were expecting or hoping to pay. So how do you cover that gap in need? So like I mentioned, scholarships can be really good to supplement that need. It shouldn't cover the full need because, again, you want the biggest financial aid to come from the schools that your student is applying to. Summer jobs or later summer internships can be a really great way for students to contribute to their own education. So especially the summer that's coming up before they start college, they finish high school, you know, they don't have any school assignments anymore. So this might be a good time for a student to save up, not only for helping to pay their education, but also for the fun things they might want to do while they're in college. So, you know, they might want to have dinner with their friends some weekends. They might want to find a spring break trip or an opportunity to participate in. As students are becoming more independent, I think it's also makes sense for them to be contributing to some of the things that they want to do. So you can also have conversations with your student about, you know, we'll help cover this school expense, we're going to help cover this other expense, but if you want to do blank thing, maybe that's on you. So these are, again, conversations that are important to have before your student gets on campus and maybe they're not responding to the phone as often as you would like for them to do. Something else that you might want to think about, some schools have a living on campus requirement for the first year, and then others will have it for the first 3 years or for all 4 years of college. So making sure that you know what the policies are at each school and what a dorm costs, what a meal plan costs. There's also usually different types of meal plans. So looking at maybe your student takes out the smaller meal plan and maybe they can cook some meals. If your student has never cooked before in their life, maybe taking out the bigger meal plan makes sense for them. But again, it's a conversation to have to see where maybe some corners can be cut to make sure that school is affordable. Also, starting off at another school and then transferring, a lot of students have to do this. There's no shame in it. If I know it can be hard if they've been accepted to their dream school to then take that step back and say, you know, I'm going to save some money, I'm going to start out somewhere else, and then I'm going to apply as a transfer student. At the end of the day, they're still going to be getting the degree from the school they want. You know, they get the same piece of paper as everyone else. So there's no shame in that. Just making sure that they keep that end goal in mind. I think sometimes if they start another school, maybe they can get comfortable there and then decide that maybe that's the one for them. So again, I think all of these are conversations that are important to have as a family, to know, like, let your student know that they're supported, but also being honest with what's affordable, with what can be done, versus where we need to be more realistic with things. So there's some other resources that we want to share with you guys as we start wrapping this up. We are on different social media platforms. So on Instagram, we share a lot of scholarship resources. Like I mentioned, scholarships are a monthly thing where different months there will be different things released. And usually we post those on Instagram of like flagging scholarship opportunity. On YouTube, we go in depth more specifically into different topics. So as you can see, some of the things here, going over college interviews, having conversations about financial aid, transitioning to college, different things like that. So those will be longer 3 to 5 minute videos. And then we also have fun TikTok content for students. Sometimes we'll share scholarship resources there too, but also acknowledging that this can be a really emotional process for students. So there is some motivational content on there too. All right, so that's the end of our presentation. Thank you for joining.